Chapter 551, Rise Again. The black storm once again swept over the mortal realm, tracing its path southward. From west to east, from north to south, the sky-darkening black wind tore apart everything in its path. In no time at all, Typhon had arrived at the ranges of Mount Carishan. However, it didn't find Zeus there. Only an empty cave greeted it, as if mocking its arrogance. After a roar of anger, Typhon sank the mountain range, turning it into plains and inland lakes, along with tunnels that led straight to the underworld. The furious king of all monsters scoured heaven and earth, trying to find traces of Zeus. It stirred up the waters, destroying Poseidon's palace that was built in the deep sea, casually slaughtering countless marine creatures and permanently shaking the seabed. It surveyed the earth from the skies, annihilating every life it saw. Numerous mountains vanished into nothingness. Cracks proliferated across the land. It climbed onto Olympus once more, nearly toppling the entire Mount of the Gods. Yet it still failed to find any trace of Zeus. It was faster than the gods. Even the swiftest among the deities couldn't match a fraction of Typhon's speed, with its dragon wings. But a day had passed quickly, and it still hadn't found Zeus, not even any other true god. The divine king was not found, but the sense of repulsion from the cosmos was growing stronger. This was due to the nature of Typhon's power, as well as its actions against the natural order. As it wreaked unrestrained destruction in the material world, this feeling of repulsion kept mounting on it, even starting to spread horizontally across the world. Laws tentatively stirred, flowing toward a tighter configuration. The last time there was a similar change was at the turn of an era. The great war between the primordial deities shook the foundations of the present world, which eventually led to the enforcement of laws that shrouded the world. But it was ultimately not so harsh, as it was a tentative probe. It constrained the gods but was not strict. It established standards for punishment, but the primordial gods were barely affected by it. This time, however, Typhon's actions seemed to once again provoke the bottom line of the laws, and the guilt of its previous attempts with Gaia to shake the pillars of heaven was compounded onto it. After all, Typhon was indeed a child of Mother Earth. And so, as time moved on, night rose and fell, laws subtly shifted. At the last moment of this day, Typhon, enraged but without a target for its fury, rode the black wind back to Mount Nysa. At the peak of the high mountain, Atropos was still there alone, sitting amid the shattered rocks. Only now, she held a pair of scissors in her hands, endlessly cutting at the unseen with her wrinkled and spotted arms. Swish! With a flap of its wings, enveloped in the black wind, the king of all monsters came to Mount Nysa for the second time. "What are you doing, Old One? Where have you hidden Zeus?" The furious Typhon violently grasped Atropos in its palm, the black flames in its eyes incessantly scorching her. A burnt smell wafted from the body of the Fate, but before the Demon King, facing this sudden turn of events, she just calmly stared at the 100-headed monster, seemingly unfazed by pain. Or perhaps, to prevent the future abode from turning to ashes, Atropos had deliberately stayed here. "It's pointless, Typhon, you have already lost. You can't kill me, you can't even make me feel pain. Did you know? The pain of the flesh is far less than that of the spirit. And the torment to my body from your actions is far less severe than the disturbance in the destiny your very existence brings to this world. This backlash keeps me sleepless through the night, but the destruction of my body will not. Perhaps destroying it will even allow me to have a good sleep," Atropos said faintly, her pale eyes rolling back. "Since my birth, I've never experienced what sleep feels like." "So you deceived me," Typhon roared with its dragon head, the voices of its hundreds of heads mingling. "You lied to me, you have no way to kill a deity. You deceived me, I will make your life a living hell. I may not have been honest about the origin of the fruit of one day, Typhon, but its effect is real. If I had hidden its effect from you, it would have been ineffective even if you had eaten it." Atropos's colorless, pale eyes stared unblinkingly at Typhon as she calmly said, "You missed your chance, you weren't even willing to eat another fruit of one day after seeing Zeus. You had the chance to defeat him if you had been careful, cautious, wise, but that is not in your nature, you are inherently incapable of it. Give up, Typhon. Everything has already been destined. Surrender to the divine king. That is your best. Bang! The last part of her sentence was cut off. Typhon pressed Atropus's head into her chest. The deity's tenacious vitality still sustained the fate's life force. Typhon knew it could not kill her, but it no longer wanted to listen to the old thing's nonsense. It wasn't just because of the irritation that came from deep within, but also because of the changes happening in the distance. Its 99 heads turned southward, where a familiar aura suddenly rose. At the location of Olympus, the place it had searched over and over but never found any results. Unbeknownst to it, the figure that had been defeated by it once was riding the storm. The divine king dressed in armor cut through his previous sorry state, wielding a divine artifact pointing north. The clouds parted before him, Zeus' majestic and solemn demeanor in full display. Chapter 552. Rise Again _2. At that moment, Typhon's chaotic mind seemed to grasp something. It was a trap, and he was the beast caught in the net. Surrender, Typhon. It's all over now. Standing high in the heavens, Zeus had no idea where the gods who had fled from Mount Olympus were now, but he believed they were likely all watching the outcome of this battle. Swear loyalty to me, the progenitor of demons. I can be lenient with you. Roar. Zeus, with a mighty roar, without a hint of hesitation, a savage force was unleashed from Typhon the moment he saw Zeus. What of schemes and tricks, what of traps, what of the fruit of one day and fate? Could any of that hold a place in his eyes? If so, he would not have come to the surface of the earth but would have obediently stayed underground, heeding Gaia's teachings, waiting for the so-called helpers, waiting for the right moment. Now, the old creature had disappeared somewhere unknown, and the whole world seemed to be against him, but he would not fear or hesitate. He was the demon god of destruction, the frenzied monster, and no matter what stood in his way, he had to overcome it first. Boom! A storm that reached from the sky to the earth erupted, charging recklessly towards the divine king, followed by Typhon's earth-shaking roar. Zeus, come. To kill you or to be killed by you. There has never been a third option between us. Not far from Mount Olympus in an unnamed valley, with a gentle chant, the goddess resembling a young girl awakened from her confusion. Everything was as it had been when she left, as if she had merely blinked. But Athena knew that something unknown had definitely changed just now. If it were any other deity, they might really believe it was only an illusion or a momentary lapse, given how lofty the power of the world is, to the extent that even if gods were to take a round trip to the Heminu world, they would be none the wiser. But there are always exceptions, and without a doubt, Athena and Apollo were those two exceptions. There's no need to mention the latter, for at this moment, the god of light, who was similarly returned to his realm, had crashed to the ground, enduring pain that reached the depths of his consciousness and the wounds of being torn from his origin. Ra's tearing was not merely a physical pull. Amid the collision and clashing of two worlds, the actions of a supreme deity from a foreign realm directly tore away some of his most fundamental powers. At this moment, Apollo didn't even have the strength to transform back into a human. He maintained the form of a bald eagle without wings. One moment he had been soaring in the sky, and the next he had suffered such a heavy blow. Apollo didn't understand what had happened, but he had to endure the consequences of this sudden calamity. As for the former, at present, Athena felt as though she had been dreaming, and something that had been weighing on her heart since birth had vanished. The sense of relief that came from her soul filled her with joy, prompting an involuntary smile on her face. However, the dream didn't end there. In that bizarre and fantastic dreamscape, she vaguely remembered a blazing light approaching her. The light was so intense, as if it sought to incinerate her, but all that danger was firmly blocked by a figure standing outside. So, was this a premonitory dream? Her gaze shifting, Athena seemed lost in thought. However, the next moment, a loud noise from the outside world interrupted her musing. Boom! The disturbance came from the north. When her thoughts were interrupted, Athena turned around abruptly. Her gaze crossed Olympus and looked towards the direction of the loud noise. In the north of the continent, black wind and thunder were colliding. The grand battle between the divine king and the progenitor of monsters raged on. It was as if her escape from Olympus had been but an illusion. Zeus had never been strung up on Typhon's bones and dragged like a dead dog to the top of the mountain of the gods. Has time become distorted? Perhaps I should take a look. And the sun? If it really was a premonitory dream, what does that signify? The sun in Athena's dream felt different from the one she had known before, but dreams and reality are inherently distinct, and prophecies aren't so straightforward. Thus, after hesitating for a moment, Athena chose to approach the battleground of the divine king, but she shifted her course to be a little closer to the star-studded sky. If it indeed was a premonitory dream, then everything in the dream should hold some significance. She would not encounter any danger. The one who truly faced harm was someone else. In this view, perhaps the change in the sun was a blessing rather than a curse for her. Roar! Claws swinging. Rage and unwillingness surged in Typhon's heart. Bearing the brunt of the thunderous sky, just like the last time, the king of all monsters charged forth regardless of his own injuries. Compared to before, Zeus, who held thunder, seemed a tad stronger, but for Zeus at this moment, the once proud divine artifact had lost much of its crucial significance. As for his opponent, Typhon, he cared not a whit for such a change. He simply opened his gaping maw and lunged at the divine king. Tear, the sound of flesh being ripped apart, of skin breaking, but what followed was an excruciating pain. Typhon watched, shocked and angry, as one of his heads was severed. Although the flesh on his neck was regenerating and a new head would grow back before long, this was still inconceivable. He should have easily achieved victory. He could have torn Zeus to pieces once more. Confusion and anger raged in his chest, and Typhon felt uncontrollable fury. Chapter 553, Rise Again _3. Zeus! And you insect, even you dare to spy on me! An enraged roar bellowed from Typhon as he suddenly noticed a tiny figure in the distance. Like Athena, that was also one of the deities who had successively returned, yet among them, no one noticed they had been missing for a time. The current chronology still seemed somewhat chaotic. Although the gods were unclear about the reasons, they naturally attributed it to the great battle between the divine king and the monster ancestor. It was understandable that Zeus had previously suffered a great defeat but was now exchanging blows with Typhon in the blink of an eye. It might be some conspiracy or stratagem. A monster that emerged from some obscure corner easily defeating the divine king was somewhat beyond the understanding of the gods. Now, seeing Zeus showing his divine might, many deities abandoned the thought of fleeing and instead tried to come and assist the divine king. Then, the next moment, a colossal serpentine tail whooshed through the air, smashing the war god Ares into the ground. Ha 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 ha. Ho! Insect, this is your fate. His confusion swept away. Typhon's will surged once again. However, facing him, Zeus did not miss this opportunity. Typhon, you dare be distracted in front of me. Thick lightning split the sky, directly severing 2 or 3 of Typhon's dragon heads, then striking hard against its body. The figure of Zeus followed, seemingly no longer fearful of close combat with Typhon but instead taking the initiative to rush in close. Although he was not particularly fond of Ares, Typhon's actions still filled him with indignant fury. The divine king appeared to have forgotten how he had been miserably defeated before. All he could feel right now was his own body brimming with power, as if nothing could stand in his way. Boom! Typhon, bow your head to me, for we are both descendants of Mother Earth. No one can forever stand above all. A momentary bow is not shameful, and the Hecatonkhyres are proof that I do not reject hideously ugly monsters. In a head-on collision, it was the insurmountable monster that was forced back. Zeus's voice thundered like a tempest, and for some reason, he was not in a hurry to attempt killing Typhon. What a mighty demon god! In this moment, with the upper hand, Zeus began to entertain a different thought. If such a monster could be made to serve him, what could the primordial deities do? Each primordial deity was alone. They, too, had conflicts among themselves, but Typhon and he were two. He could fully use this to his advantage, maneuvering alliances and threats, ultimately bringing all primordial deities under the rule of the divine court. If he could truly achieve that step, Zeus dared not imagine how much his kingship would expand. However, obviously this was just Zeus's idea. Typhon did not share the same opinion. What responded to his entreaty was only increasingly fierce resistance. Roar! The decapitated heads slid to the ground, new dragon heads emerging one by one. Faced with the invincible divine king, Typhon's gaze did not waver in the slightest. Were practitioners of conspiracy such as him also worthy of speaking such words to it? Bow my head? Lies of deities. Besides, for you to make me bow, you are not worthy. Boom! Once more, the great battle surged, the earth split, and the underworld quaked. Even under the suppression of the law as much as possible, the collision of great powers still brought indelible scars to the world. From the earth to the sky, the traces of ripped space spread across everything. But this time, Typhon's decline was indeed difficult to conceal any longer. Chapter 554, Rise and Fall. Boom! Do you see now, Typhon? You can no longer win. From earth to the sky, and from the sky to the sea, the two gods recklessly released their powers. At this moment, they were the center of heaven and earth. Unlike the brief engagement before, this time, the battle between the Divine King and Typhon lasted long enough for the other gods to react. Even Zeus deliberately led their battlefield through the realms of different deities, clearly revealing who would merely watch and who was willing to exert effort for the divine court. The goddess of Hearthfire bestowed her guardianship upon the Divine King from afar. Ares allowed the desire for combat in the Divine King's heart to amplify his strength. The goddess of life attempted to suppress Typhon's recovery from injuries, while Athena too did not take direct action, merely raising her spear to let victory decide who it should favor. Even the god of the ocean, who usually had a strained relationship with the Divine King, finally emerged from the ocean's depths, mobilizing the sea's power to suppress Typhon. When the king of all monsters rampaged through the world before, they quickly hid away to avoid disaster, but now none of the gods minded lending a hand. After all, the outcome was clear, and regardless of their relationship with Zeus, they were all willing to do a favor at such a moment. Without friends, without allies, all the gods stood against it. Both heaven and earth were its enemies, and even Mother Earth, which had given birth to it, left no trace. Like a stone monkey ensnared in a tightening net, surveying all around, all Typhon could see were opponents. Its blood rained down upon the sea like rain, and opposite it was Zeus, growing stronger with each battle. But it didn't care about that at all. To the Divine King's offer of surrender, Typhon replied only with another furious roar. No one knew what it was thinking, only its massive body thrashing about in the storm. One head after another was severed by the thunderbolts, yet those that remained were still full of fight. Madman, foolish, obstinately ignorant. With an ugly expression, Zeus indeed felt regret, even more than his indignation at being ignored. His sovereign ritual was near its initial completion, and once the 12 pillars were erected, the next step was to continually expand the domain enveloped by the concept of kingship. Even if not considering Typhon itself as a suitable henchman, even if that demon never wished to fight for him in the future, merely having the mighty Typhon submit to him would greatly benefit Zeus's prospects. But it wasn't willing. The madman wasn't willing. Despite having 100 heads, it could not match even the most mundane mortal. Even acting like those despicable unbelievers would have been better. Those who mouthed nothing but lies without a shred of faith. At least they knew when to bend with the times, to love life and fear death. You damned beast, when you consumed the fruit of one day and then couldn't find the prisoner who should have been in the Carytian, you should have realized that it was over for you, that you fell into a trap, that it was no longer possible for you to win. You damned monster! As time passed and the powers of fate acted upon him, Zeus felt a constant influx of strength into his body. He was already capable of defeating his adversary, but he still made one last attempt. Typhon, give up. You are too new to this world, and you don't understand its beauty. Surrender. Submit to me. The gods enjoy eternal life in eternal bliss, delicacies and finery, beauties and nectar. All the wonderful things in this world belong to us. Isn't that good? Roar! This time, Typhon didn't even speak back to him. Perhaps it said something, but Zeus was unable to understand the monster's roars. Before him, all Zeus could see were the unyielding eyes of Typhon. He finally realized, as long as this creature could fight, it would never submit to him. Fine, since you won't accept wine. Endless thunder surged behind him, forming into a colossal thunderous giant spirit. At this moment, Zeus subconsciously replicated something his father had once done. Perhaps due to the difference between time and the authority of thunder, the incarnation the divine king summoned was nowhere near as terrifying as the one during the epic change. He couldn't shoulder the sun and the moon, he couldn't span continents with the sweep of his hand, but he still managed to extend his right hand and press Typhon into the very center of the sea. Boom! 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 The next moment, the divine artifact was raised high, accompanying the rumbling sounds as the arrows of thunder acted like a sledgehammer, treating Typhon like iron on an anvil, relentless under the strikes. Thunderbolts penetrated Typhon's immortal body, breaking its bones and scorching its innards, then starting all over again as it healed. A similar scene, the same participants, but the roles had now reversed. Zeus, who not long before had his limbs broken, had now switched places, and Typhon, once victorious over the world, was now utterly powerless to retaliate, struggling in vain. Had it become weaker, or had Zeus become stronger? Atop the sea, Typhon's confused thoughts had no answers, but neither did it need an answer. The pain penetrated to the bone, yet its will remained stubborn. The beating only incited Typhon's ferocity. It was not truly insane, it knew Zeus wanted to enlist it. It was clearer still how luxurious and carefree the life of the gods was. Now, with the reversal of power, that premonition that had loomed beside it since its birth seemed about to become a reality. If it persisted, it was very likely that it would die. Surrender. It seemed as if a voice was echoing beside Typhon's somewhat fuzzy consciousness. Surrender would avoid death, even for the sake of its power. Zeus would surely be lenient with its crimes. As long as it was willing to contribute its strength at the right time, the divine king would definitely not be stingy with any pleasure and glory. Chapter 555. Rise and Fall _2. No. With eyes wide and round, Typhon looked at the giant spirit that kept pounding down upon him. You want me to surrender, to bow down to you as those ridiculous gods did, hiding my disdain for you yet still calling you my liege? What a fool's dream. Roar! Gathering strength from who knows where, the northern sea roiled endlessly, and Zeus's great hand was slowly lifted inch by inch. The divine king was somewhat shocked. Even though half of the dragon head had been chopped off, even though its power was being constantly drained by him, could this terrible monster still resist? Zeus looked down intently, but all he saw was that defiant head held high and those eyes burning with flames. To the victor belong the spoils. Zeus, holding his lightning bolt with no mercy, said, If will were of any use, then Prometheus should be standing before me demanding reparations. Those mortals should be assaulting Mount of the Gods, instead of struggling in the abyss of the sea, sinking into death. So it is for him, for them, and for you all the same. Boom! The thunder that reached the heavens and pierced the earth fell from the void, completely shattering the storm that had perpetually surrounded Typhon. Under the power of the divine king, its few remaining dragon heads fell like wheat, leaving only the last one, its most vital one. Then, under the gaze of all the gods, Zeus reached out with his great hand, pulling an island from afar, and pressed it down upon Typhon's form. Even now, the divine king had not quite decided how to deal with this creature. There were promises he found hard to make in front of the other gods and considerations he could not openly admit to, so he still wanted to try. Moreover, to kill such a demon god who had once been more powerful than himself using the power of fate made Zeus inevitably feel a tinge of empathetic sorrow. Last chance. From high above, Zeus looked down at the isle beneath his feet, his expression coldly surveying the surroundings. He hoped this damned creature would grasp one of his few merciful gestures. Typhon sank to the seabed. Zeus's true form did not pursue him, but Typhon no longer had the strength to move anyway. Descending with the waves, the power that once could stir the oceans was now void, leaving Typhon somewhat unaccustomed to it. It saw a huge shadow above, coming down with a crash, pressing its body underneath. That was the island moved by the divine king, laden with his divine power, as if to imprison this demon for eternity. Of course, an island alone wouldn't be enough. As soon as its strength recovered even a little, Typhon wouldn't be restrained by it unless Zeus himself presided over this place. So, the king of all monsters didn't even spare it a glance but merely sank deeper into the sea, plummeting toward the darkest depths. It was a little tired, but Typhon had no intention of giving up. It silently accumulated its strength, waiting for the moment it could break free from the island. However, the instant the island crashed down, along with the surging waves, Zeus's apparition appeared before the king of all monsters. He stood above while Typhon lay beneath him. Yet, even as a defeated being, the king of all monsters returned a disdainful gaze to his visitor. It knew what the visitor wanted to say, but it didn't want to listen, and this attitude made Zeus's brow furrow once again. Typhon, I don't understand. Are you not afraid of death? Don't you want to live? Is there nothing in this world that interests you? We don't have to be enemies. No enmity lasts forever in this world. You've merely been abetted by that mad woman Gaia. There is no need to harbor such animosity towards me. Taking a deep breath, Zeus to this day didn't quite understand Typhon's psychology. There should be no animosity between them. Although Typhon was a child of Gaia, Zeus didn't believe Mother Earth could make a crazed, self-absorbed demon serve her purposes. So what exactly drove it to kill him, and what made it disregard life and death? Was it just a pure desire for destruction? Zeus couldn't understand. He wanted an answer, but before him, Typhon just looked at him with contempt. Tell me, Typhon, what do you want? What are your grievances? I am the divine king of the present world, the supreme ruler of heavens, earth, and seas. There is little in this world that I cannot give you, as long as you are willing to serve me. Aside from my throne, we could negotiate everything else. Speaking gravely, if the Olympian gods were to hear this, it would significantly diminish the divine king's prestige. He hardly sounded like a victor, but more like a weakling suing for peace. But Zeus didn't care because no god could witness this conversation. He only stared into Typhon's eyes, looking for even the slightest hint of wavering, but once again he was disappointed. All he saw was deeper contempt. The challenger regarded him with disdain, from the beginning to now. A flame of nameless fury burned within his chest, and Zeus couldn't help but speak coldly. Typhon, do you think you can still succeed? From the moment you consumed the fruit of one day, your failure was inevitable. What else can you gain by persisting now, aside from death? Clenching his fist as if grasping something, Typhon's unyielding nature left Zeus with no angle to exploit, and he finally revealed his ultimate threat. The power of fate swirled around him. Although this monster's immortality was so formidable, much like a branch stuck into Erebus's palm, Typhon theoretically wasn't immortal, but Zeus alone couldn't kill him, but he still had fate. Chapter 556. Rise and Fall _3. If he were willing, the fruit of one day would help him achieve his goal. He could kill this monster once and for all, crushing its every will. Ha! So this is the Divine King, another puppet on strings. Without fear, without flinching, feeling the death that was within arm's reach, and looking at Zeus, who was threatening it but still had expectation in his eyes, Typhon instead laughed heartily. It knew that Zeus did not understand it, but it had no intention of making him understand. For a being that was a tool from birth, it only wanted to do whatever it wanted to do. It was born with this knowledge, but unlike the Titan deities, the knowledge Typhon had came from its bloodline, from its own power. So the extent of its knowledge was only related to the origin of these powers. It knew of the mother tree, that supreme being that saw it as a tool for spreading its power. It knew of Mother Earth, the first life it saw after being born, the deity that saw it as a tool for vengeance. It also knew of the destiny that was originally meant for Typhon, the one that allowed it to be born with the power of an outer god. That destiny was to be defeated by Zeus, to highlight the divine king's bravery. Until now, another person stood before it, wanting it to work for them. Even though it was just a dog of fate, this so-called divine king was actually trying to convince it to surrender to him. Why? Why? Just because you were born as Zeus, you can rule the world, and I was born as Typhon, so I should be crushed under your feet? If this is the world's order, then let him come and kill me himself. In a burst of laughter, Typhon's strength began to recover, as 99 new dragon heads grew back on its tumors. It was so above board, and so unhidden. The divine king clenched his fists as the power of destiny boiled up within him like never before. And amidst this tumult of invisible force, the ancient voice of Atropos spoke. Zeus, think twice before you act. Typhon's destiny should not end here, it should be immortal. Only some force has altered this outcome, but it should not die by your hand here. I do not know what the killing of it will bring, but it will certainly not be what you desire. But I have no choice, Atropos. If it were willing to give itself a chance, then I would certainly accept it gladly. His palm raised, Zeus looked down emotionlessly at the king of all monsters below. Did he ever really want to come to this? But all the divine king saw was head after head of dragons growing out. You will be my stepping stone. You will bring me prestige. You will be made into a buffoon in mortals' tales, and a topic for gods during idle chat. The world will only know that I, the divine king of Olympus, subdued the brutal monster here, saving all life from a demon intent on annihilating the world. That is the only truth. Typhon, is this what you want? Ha! With a scornful laugh and its dragon heads held high, Typhon's body surged with power. The island weighing down upon it began to tremble, riddled with cracks. Overlapping voices echoed in the deep sea. The will of the master of monsters never wavered. Do you think you have one? Today it's me. Tomorrow it will be you. Zeus. Those who grovel before fate can never oppose it. Come on, Zeus. Come kill me. This is just the beginning. My death is not the end. For the next 100,000 years, the world will remember my name. I am the king of all monsters, Typhon. Above the sea, the island that had just appeared not long ago was shaking violently, red light shining through the fissures, magma bursting from the mountain ranges. Standing high in the sky, under the watchful eyes of the gods, Zeus lowered his head. He seemed to glimpse that scornful look, but this time he did not hesitate anymore. His palm fell, and with the sound of thunder, all other sounds came to a stop. However, Zeus remained expressionless, because he knew that this disaster of Typhon, its life and death, was just the beginning. The impact it brought would not end there. Maybe just as it had said, for the next 100,000 years, whether the living wanted to or not, they would be forced to remember the name Typhon. Chapter 557, Blood Sun. The once mighty demon king died. His rise meteoric and his fall just as abrupt. There's no disputing that beneath this nameless island, Typhon lies in eternal slumber. When fate denied his existence and the power that made him chose not to sustain him, the mightiest demon of history was doomed to fall sooner or later. However, flying above the island, Zeus was also aware that although he had slain Typhon, the power of fate had only targeted the demon known as Typhon. Beyond that, the remnants of Typhon's original essence, which he hadn't absorbed and which fate had judged to be enough to reverse the balance of power between him and his opponent, would not simply vanish into thin air. They dispersed, in some way that Zeus could not quite comprehend. Beneath the seas, later known as the Thalassan Sea, a continuous stream of power seeped out, becoming an indispensable part of this world. As the divine king, Zeus already sensed the will of the law. It did not wish to see this phenomenon continue, and addressing this trouble was Zeus's responsibility. Therefore, a seal is needed here and someone must oversee it. And it's not only here but on the land as well. His gaze flickered, Perhaps because he had also possessed some of the power originally from Typhon, Zeus glimpsed the direction in which those forces would disperse after his death. They separated from the deceased demon gods, then gathered towards life still alive. Typhon's limbs, scattered across the world during the Great Battle, were their targets. And if not contained, the land would once again be plagued with death and disaster. Though many mortals perished because of Typhon, most were collateral damage, as the king of all monsters never really focused on humans. But those lives that inherited his power might not be so indifferent. To prevent Faith's source from being overly harmed, Zeus felt it was wise to plan ahead. Conveniently, he had remained here to try and seal Typhon's corpse, giving the gods a chance to prove their relevance. The chief evil is dead. His expression stern, turning his attention away from the island below, Zeus's gaze swept across the gods. Then, the next step, his words cut off abruptly as Zeus suddenly looked up, and the gods also felt the change in the sky, prompting them to look upward. The fierce sun still hung in the sky as usual, seemingly no different from any other day. Yet, for some reason, when they saw it, the gods felt as if they were looking at a face smiling down at them. When did this happen? Where is Helios? Where did he go? Such a transformation of the sun was not an overnight occurrence. Zeus even felt that the nature of the sunlight had changed. There was a certain power in it, subtly influencing any life it shone upon, and Zeus was all too familiar with this power. Outer God. Taking a step forward, Zeus intended to venture into the starry sky, but the next instant, the peaceful island beneath his feet stopped him in his tracks. He could tell that if he dared leave now, he might solve the problem with the sun, but the power unleashed after Typhon's death would be completely uncontrolled, contaminating the entire world starting from the northern sea. Turning to look at the gods, now only they could resolve this trouble, but under the gaze of the divine king, the gods all looked down. The sun and the god of sun cannot be conflated. If Helios had changed, they would all dare to do battle with him. But if it was the sun that had changed, Zeus, let me go. Let me go. Two voices rang out almost simultaneously. Hestia and Athena looked at each other. The goddess of Heathfire was somewhat surprised. She had always thought that her nominal niece didn't get along with Zeus, but unexpectedly, she was willing to step forward to share the burden of the divine king. You all should have sensed the nature of the power within the sunlight. I am the goddess of wisdom, it cannot influence me, so I am the most suitable candidate, Athena explained with a smile as Hestia's gaze turned to her. Standing by, Zeus made an instant decision. Then you shall go, Athena. I believe you can solve this problem, at least halt the spread of the sunlight's rays for the time being. But where is Apollo? Looking around, the divine king did not see his son. If the god of light were here to assist, the task should have been much easier, but Apollo was nowhere to be found. However, with the urgency of the situation, Zeus had no time to search for him, merely snorting coldly before giving the command. The prime evil is dead, but its influence persists. Go forth to the earth, eradicate the demons left by Typhon, and once all is ended, I will celebrate your victory atop Mount Olympus. The starry sky, the zodiac regions. What was just a few days for the gods, not even a month for Zeus, had been a long time for the life upon the earth, and even more so for the starry sky. As the gods returned and Typhon fell, the disordered law that caused the temporal marvel gradually subsided, and the world's chronology slowly returned to normal. At the same time, however, the sun's transformation was finally coming to an end. Like the last straw on the camel's back, when Typhon died, its power scattered. The part that belonged to Mother Earth gave birth to many rational beings that were non-gods, while the force from the mother tree naturally spawned more evil creatures. Among them all, the most powerful was none other than the sun itself, hanging in the sky. Ancient evil, fallen Corona, it was gradually reviving from an inert object, possessing its own chaotic thoughts and will. And the sapling that grew on the dark side of the celestial body had now become a towering tree, drawing ceaseless power from the void. Despite the sun's nearing capacity, the power it attracted showed no sign of abating. The excess, which the sun could not absorb, scattered across the world with its light. The earth, the stars, the oceans, and even some small worlds that clung to the material realm. Most of the realms derived from the fragments of the 9 realms did not have their own luminaries. They relied on the light of the sun and the moon of the material world for their cycles, and some did not even possess life. Thus now, the power of the outer gods invaded them with the sunlight. Perhaps it should be called a return. After all, their precursors were the 9 realms, and the precursor of the mother tree was the divine tree that supported them. They inherently shared an inseparable bond, and now it was merely a return to the past. At the core of the sun, Helios had long since lost any fixed shape. Wooden thorns extended from his body, pulsating like a heartbeat. If the sun were a person, then he would be its heart, a massive source of power coursing through the god of sun, then processed by his godhood to meet the requirements of the law. Is this failure then? How ridiculous! If I possessed such great power, how would I have come to this? Though situated amid the stars, Typhon's chaos had not escaped the observation of Helios. In fact, most gods in this world could see everything happening. Typhon's power, Typhon's brutality, its success, and its defeat. Helios could see even more than the other deities. At least he knew the details of Typhon and the similarities in their powers. If I also had such power, how could I have been imprisoned from birth? How would Cronus dare to pressure me? Monsters remain monsters, with no understanding of timing or situation. What meaning is there in all that you have done? No one will understand you, no one will honor you, and even the deeds you've done will be distorted, rewritten. You will become the original sin who sought to destroy the world. Your victory will be painted as the cunning of a deceitful trickster. Your failure will become a medal to underscore the wisdom and strength of others. Mortals will celebrate the divine king for eradicating you from the world, thus contributing to his fame and authority. The most important thing is, with a cold laugh, Helios looked at the divine light flying in from the sea. You are dead, so everything is settled. Gods are immortal, so they always have the chance to turn the tables, but you don't. Just like now. I can't possibly fight the world alone, but so what? As an undying true god, I will always wait for my opportunity, like the next cycle of chronology, when the divine king is dethroned. The deep voice echoed in the sun, and Helios felt that he had said too much. He actually understood that it stemmed from his envy and unwillingness. Envious of Typhon's far superior beginning, and unwilling to see it end this way. Seeing such a being ultimately unable to escape the fate of failure, Helios felt a mix of pity for its misfortune and anger at its lack of struggle. But then he thought his own emotions were inexplicable. A mere demon, a madman at that. What it did and what it had to do with him, especially given that, even until the moment of death, Typhon's power was still beyond his reach. Gathering his thoughts, Helios stopped dwelling on it. His gaze turned to the earth, where, because of Typhon's death, an unknown number of powerful lives had been born. From its fallen dragon heads were born the 100-headed dragons. From its broken snake-like body sprouted the 9-headed serpents. There were monsters with a lion's head and a sheep's body, creatures with a lion's body and a human face. They inherited a somewhat more orderly power, and now they were scattering and fleeing, with no thought of avenging Typhon. At the same time, among the lives born from Typhon's death, many are those who carry the power of the outer gods. Its flesh, which remained in the stars, corrupted an ancient celestial body, and as the power from its death overflowed, that star began to transform into the ancient evil, star of death omens. The number of lives unintentionally killed by Typhon was incalculable. Their flesh piled up, agglomerating and distorting under the power of the demon king, gradually evolving into the ancient evil, flesh corridor. The flame that burned in Typhon's 100 eyes did not extinguish. It transformed into the ancient evil, immortal demonic flames. And the black storm that once swirled around Typhon's body was also activated by the power from the mother tree, turning into the ancient evil, world-burning wind. They inherited Typhon's power and its undying nature, and unlike those somewhat rational monsters that fled, These ancient evil beings became violent because of Typhon's death, beginning to madly destroy everything around them. From his place among the stars, Helios could see that, in addition to Athena coming towards him, there were more divine lights flying towards their location, attempting to prevent them from harming their worshippers. And that was just on the earth. The god of sun could feel that the changes in the underworld were even more intense. The reason the deities of the underworld had been so quiet from beginning to end was that they simply couldn't take care of themselves. The power of the mother tree was being unleashed without restraint there, and although with Typhon's death, its anchor point to the material world had been temporarily cut off in part, this was clearly only temporary. As long as its power spreads through the material world, one day, it will find a way around the shackles placed on the surface of Niflheim, or even descend to this world in person. It's truly chaotic. Shaking his head, Helios withdrew his energy. Athena was getting closer by now, and he was somewhat curious. In the god of sun's estimation, he might be sealed by the divine king, but it would only be the divine king. But this goddess of wisdom, what made her think she could confront a fallen sun? Chapter 558. Land of the Dead. In the underworld, the fields of truth. A streak of gray flashed past, and space trembled as Hades staggered out from the void. At this moment, his face was extremely weary, etched with the expression of one who had narrowly escaped a calamity. Just as at the onset of Typhon's disaster, when Helios within the sun was infected by the branches of the mother tree, the underworld, as the interface closest to the abyss and Niflheim in terms of the concept of space and time, was directly corroded by the power of the mother tree. An endless stream of force had been flowing through the fissures in space and time since the outset, bypassing the seals to assimilate everything around it. Some close minor interfaces were altered in an instant, and the underworld faced great trouble. Almost immediately, Hades chose to fuse with the symbol of his godhood to counter this sudden disaster. Naturally, Hades was no match for the mother tree, but luckily, compared to Helios, who possessed only a fraction of the sun's power, the deities wielding authority in the underworld were united, exerting their utmost to block the encroaching power of the mother tree. Moreover, as a cohesive entity, the underworld inherently possessed a greater volume than the sun, which enabled Hades to hold on until the moment Typhon fell. Currently, although many tributaries of the Styx had been silently altered, numerous places within the underworld, divided by the rivers of fire, had already been entirely assimilated by the power of the foreign realm. Reflected upon the deity himself, Hades' robe was missing many pieces. Vast tracts of corruption appeared across the gray plains, countless wraiths were polluted into monsters. Yet regardless, the main body of the underworld ultimately remained intact. Thus, after toiling for what felt like many years amidst the chaos of space and time, Hades could finally relax a bit. He withdrew from the special state fused with the underworld, instead entrusting Persephone to run it on his behalf. Since Typhon's death, the aggressive incursion of the mother tree had transformed into a ceaseless trickle, significantly easing the pressure on the underworld. Even if the queen of the underworld's power wasn't as great as his, she could temporarily take over. At this moment, Hades was immensely relieved and grateful that he had found his own queen of the underworld early on. Otherwise, he truly would have been unable to stand alone. Outer gods. Truly a terrifying disaster. Even the ancient spirit realm and the territories of the primordial deities did not escape. Only Tartarus was an exception. No, perhaps it is simply because the abyss has no external force extending outwards. Finally able to catch his breath, Hades looked out over the vast gray plains. His heart ached, yet there was also a touch of horror. It would be too late to tally the extent of the underworld's losses, but just by considering the state of some of the primordial gods, one could roughly gauge the severity of this sudden calamity. As the chaos of Typhon unfolded, day and night continued to alternate, such that the powers of the land of eternal night and the realm of lightlessness surged or settled like the tide. It was these forces released from their domains that collided with the power of the outer gods, giving rise to two terrifying entities. Ancient Evil, the Crown of Silence, and Ancient Evil, the Twisted Shadow. Upon their births, descended upon the lands of the underworld. One occupied a vast region, transforming it into a forbidden zone. The other rampaged across the underworld, adding further injury to a realm already suffering under the influence of outer gods. As for the spirit realm, the power of the mother tree also did not enter the spirit realm itself, but one of the branches of the Styx, which is co-managed by the underworld and the spirit realm, namely the River of Oblivion, was not spared from her venom. A few tributaries were eroded, and many souls tainted on the surface by the force of the ancient evil, which did not disperse, thus gathered there. Under the power of primordial hatred, the flesh mother tree, they amalgamated, leading to some form of qualitative change. Mere quantity alone could not normally cross such a boundary, and no matter how many mortal souls there were, they could not sublime into deities. But now, countless souls merged into one, transforming into ancient evil, the thousand-faced Soul Eater. This last-born ancient evil almost perfectly embodied the chaos and madness of the outer gods, thousand-faced being a mere epithet. In reality, innumerable evil spirits were perpetually slaughtering each other within its body, the evil itself constantly craving to devour outer spiritual bodies. Within it, every significantly powerful evil spirit could be considered part of the will of the thousand-faced Soul Eater, and every spiritual body also had its own will. Thus, outwardly, no one knew how the entity as a whole would react. It is now ascending along the tributaries of the Styx, attempting to absorb more spiritual bodies, while the wraiths on both shores became part of it amidst the howling evil spirits. Heh! It's just as well that both Styx and the Nether Moon have stabilized the situation. Otherwise, there might have been two more serious troubles to contend with, said Hades, slightly shaking his head. Compared to the River of Vows or even the underworld itself, during the whole upheaval, the Nether Moon was the focal point of the outer god's corruption. Just as she chose the sun on the surface, the Nether Moon was the only source of light underground. If it were influenced by the mother tree, then the moonlight that illuminated the underworld would spread her power throughout the entire realm, and even many of the small worlds encircling the present world would hardly escape disaster. In such a circumstance, Hades personally witnessed the purplish fog loitering around the Nether Moon, along with those scattered crystalline leaves. Even during the most dangerous moments, the king of the underworld once noticed that the Nether Moon seemed to briefly come alive, as if a black moon were about to split from it, but it was immediately locked firmly beneath the lunar light by an ancient brass-colored book. Just like the ancient evil beings, even among the true gods, there are differences in hierarchy. Hades was certain if the Nether Moon were truly torn in half, the being that would emerge would be much more dreadful than the previous three combined. Your Majesty, we have news about the task you commanded, interrupted a thought. Along the periphery of the Fields of Truth, a figure clad in armor emerged from the distance. His presence bespoke the rarity of a powerful wraith. Well done, Evans. Where is the entrance? Asked Hades, his expression visibly brightened. The king looked at his temple, once more reduced to ruins, and couldn't help but lament its ill-fated history. Your Majesty, the weakest entry point, in my perception, is near that realm of silence. I have sensed the connection, but have never dared to approach it. The Wraith warrior bowed slightly. The place he mentioned was where an ancient evil being had just been born not long ago. There are no anomalies there, but my intuition tells me it is very dangerous, Your Majesty, he said. I understand, Evans. I had planned to deal with it last, after the disaster had passed, since it seemed harmless. Never mind, it's all the same, Hades said. Sprucing up his spirit, Hades had a bit of a headache, but he decisively changed his plan. After all, he knew what he was looking for. Just as Zeus had discovered Asgard within the belly of Mount Olympus, Hades, as ruler of the underworld and holder of half the authority, had also sensed something unusual along with the return of Persephone. Helheim, the land of the dead from Scandinavian mythology, domain of the death goddess Hel. Even though Hades didn't know its name or its past, that didn't prevent him from sensing its existence and the potent aura of death contained within that realm. However, unlike Asgard, where the deity race resides, this realm originating from the 9 realms clearly had a different nature. Deities from foreign realms can die, and there have been instances when the spirits of deities entered the land of the dead after their death. Even the sons of divine King Odin could not escape such a fate. However, the gods of chaos cannot die, which means, despite knowing of this place's existence and being Hades in name, he could not actually enter it. Therefore, in order to fully locate Helheim, Hades could only rely on his wraith subordinates. He did his best to nurture them and then had them sense the entrance to the land of the dead in different areas of the underworld. But the power of mortals can never match that of the gods. So, up until today, whether due to the current disruption of laws or perhaps because of the invasion by the Fleshmother tree, only now could the wraiths finally pinpoint the location of the land of the dead. Although Hades himself might still be unable to enter, at least he could try to send the wraiths inside. Good, you stay here. I'll go and have a look over there, and likely, I will need you to make another trip later, Hades said. With a wave of his hand, Hades looked toward the area swirling with the ancient evil being. There was no time to lose. No one knew why the ancient evil, the Crown of Silence, had chosen that place as its domain. Perhaps it too was eroding the realm for an outer god. Thus, Hades could wait no longer. He had to kill, or at least seal or expel, that ancient evil and then build a fortress there. If the wraiths could explore it, all the better. If not, I hear the goddess of the magic net had power rivaling that of true gods even before acquiring godhood. Perhaps in the future world of mortals, there will be a chance for such powerful beings to be born. Deep in thought, Hades was rather indifferent. Ever since he brought plague, lies, and strife to the mortal realm, he cared little for the faith of mortals. He wouldn't mind if such strong beings were born among them. Even subtly, he was somewhat hopeful. All mortals must die, and after death, they naturally become wraiths. The outer gods that corrupt all worlds, minds in utter chaos, truly the enemy of all intelligent life. In a flash, restraining the urge to rest for a while, Hades sped off into the distance. He had no idea what the situation was like on the surface, but for Hades it was more important to deal with his own troubles. Truly a being that corrupts everything, the Fleshmother tree. It seems eager to bring everything under its control, to become part of itself. An abominable thing. In the starry sky, within the spirit realm corresponding to the zodiacal star domain, the goddess of starlight, Aster, peered through the barrier of spacetime, watching the distant sun. In the spirit realm, the reflection of the sun was even more real. The trees growing on its back pulsed vigorously, with fruits resembling infants sprouting from the canopy. An ancient visage was concealed under the flowing flames on the surface of the great sun, with an expression that seemed gentle and kindly, but was filled with pain and struggle. As if undergoing torture, Aster could understand the pain of the sun, but she was powerless to do anything. Lane was not in the spirit realm, and Liana was fully engaged in combating and expelling the influence of the underworld, so naturally there was no one to attend to the changes in the sun. In fact, even Aster herself didn't really care what happened to the sun. However, since the zodiac regions were directly in the path of the sun's journey, if it did become a support point for the mother tree in the outer world and its tool for corrupting the heavens, then the zodiacal star domain being closest to it would inevitably be affected, and this essence of the starry core would become a forbidden zone. Aster did not want to see this happen, yet she felt helpless. Even the Eater of Suns might not be able to contend with the vastly transformed sun at the moment. Frowning with contemplation, the goddess of starlight felt somewhat at a loss, until she spotted a streak of light flying up from the earth. Is that Athena? Remembering what Lane had said before leaving, a light sparked in Aster's eyes. She had thought of a way to solve the problem. Though this might result in the lack of a sun on the earth from then on, that was for the Divine King to consider. What happened to the mortal realm was of no concern to her. Chapter 559. The Great Zodiac Barrier. Although outsiders, including the Lord of Darkness Erebus, were not aware, all deities thought the owner of the spirit realm still resided at the pinnacle of the seven-layered worlds, secretly making their plans or quietly observing the changes in the world. However, the goddess of starlight was well aware that at this moment Lane was not in the spirit realm, and he would not return here for a considerable amount of time in the future. Lane had finished setting up chaos, at least in relation to the deities, that much was certain. There might be other matters, but clearly the angels lacked understanding of them. As he had predicted, after the catastrophe of Typhon, the rigor of the world's laws would probably intensify even further. Therefore, as Lane had said before leaving, any troubles that arose afterward would have to be resolved by the angels themselves. After all, they coexisted with the spirit realm and were immortal beings. Whatever happened, it was merely a loss of some benefits. But I will manage it well. Clasping her fists softly, Aster was determined not to let Lane leave only for her to hand over the starry sky on her heels. With this thought, she involuntarily glanced into the depths of the spirit realm. The black mist that devoured light and heat was still swirling unpredictably. Without Lane's command, without the Creator's deterrence, even Liana had no way to control the Sun-Eater lurking in the depths of the spirit realm. Just as Lane had named it Eclipse, a type of ancient evil being, no one could truly control it. In fact, just as Lane had judged the evil beings, he never determined their power based on their origin, but targeted their tendencies towards order and chaos, and the degree of their thinking and rationality. Therefore, even if Eclipse had come into being when the Mother Tree was still drifting through the remnants of the Nine Realms, considering its primordial chaotic mentality, Lane still classified it as an ancient evil being at that time. If it would obey, no, even that probably wouldn't matter to today's sun anymore. Never mind, as long as I can borrow some of its power, it'll be fine. Shaking her head slightly, Aster stepped out of the spirit realm and headed in the direction from where Athena was approaching. The sun had changed. The Sun-Eater had no inhibitory effect on the power of the Mother Tree. Relying on it alone couldn't resolve the predicament with the current supreme celestial body. And although she already had an idea, her power was far from sufficient to accomplish it. Fortunately, there was now Athena. With the proliferation of intelligent life on Earth, her divine power had grown exponentially faster than Métis ever did. It was in her hands that the upper limit of the godhood of wisdom truly manifested. Among the Olympian gods now, Hestia's godhood was somewhat weaker than originally, and Demeter was already at the bottom of the domain of powerful divine forces. Hades opted out of the terrestrial disputes, and Poseidon would not count for much before he gained sufficient command over the seas. Aphrodite, who held love and beauty, was nearly ornamental. Although her mighty divine authority could even slightly affect the current Zeus at its full power, with the loss of the original trajectory's little god of love, her power was consequently greatly diminished. The goddess of life didn't have her body nearby, Apollo's origin was injured, and Ares was not worth mentioning. In fact, Athena was already the second most powerful principal god of Olympus at this moment. Unsurprisingly, the strength of her power would inevitably enhance her status. Perhaps not long after this calamity, the mortal realm's kingdom of Athens would become yet another jewel in the crown of the goddess. In the heart of the sun, watching another streak of light flash by, Helios' expression shifted subtly. He recognized the newcomer. It was the goddess of starlight from the spirit realm, also known as the Weaver of Stars, his old adversary, though it was only he who considered her an adversary. Since the Second Era, the starry sky had many rulers, including Hyperion, Cronus, two deities of daylight, and the sun occupying some zodiacal star domains could be counted among them, as well as the reclusive ancient Titan god, the lord of lightless celestial bodies Ceus, and the goddess of luminous, Phoebe. The goddess of starlight was certainly one of them. She and some other true gods of the spirit realm ruled the zodiacal star domain, and Helios' sister Selene could also be considered a minor prince. After all, despite her seeming weakness, she did inherit quite a bit of the legacy left by their parents. The gods of stars who once served the mother of light, Thea, would rather pay homage to Selene than to visit Helios, leading to an awkward situation. Spanning 2 eras, Helios never had command over even a fragment of the star domain that followed his orders. Not even the region where the sun traveled theoretically belonged to others. Ha, if it were Zeus, then I would accept it. His power is indeed strong now, but you still want to target me? Do you think I'm still the Helios of old? With a sneer, Helios thought of doing something but then stopped himself. Now, every moment, countless powers of the Mother Tree seeped into the tranquil world below through the sun's rays penetrating all. Every fraction of power he released now would become a foothold for Helios' intervention in the external world after being sealed by Zeus. Just as the Mother Tree used him and those evil entities as a medium to affect the present world, those lives affected by the corrupted corona would likewise become his medium. At such a time, it was only sensible to release power as quickly as possible. There was no need for him to be concerned. Chapter 560. The Great Zodiac Barrier _2. What are they doing? Helios's complexion altered slightly as he suddenly discovered that his connection with the outside world had weakened. No, that description wasn't accurate. It would be more precise to say that the power he released could reach beyond the zodiacal star domain was diminished. In the immense and infinite celestial expanse, something seemed to shift within the 12 zodiacal domains. Those ethereal stars that had hidden themselves away during Typhon's calamity were once again emerging amongst the stars, following their past trajectories slowly revolving. Only this time, their orbits seemed interrelated, which regulated and ordered their movements. The 12 gods of stars each took up their positions, effortlessly unifying the strength of the star domains already within their grasp. Like 12 fulcrums, at this moment, the light originating from the supreme stars was being attracted bit by bit and then torn asunder. The portion belonging to the sun was divided into 13 parts. One part fell into a location within Helios's perception akin to a black hole, while the other 12 descended into the 12 star domains. The power belonging to the Mother Tree was similarly torn apart but wasn't absorbed by the star domains and instead scattered across the starry sky, then was suppressed by the strength of the star domains. The light was fragmented, and Helios could feel that this colossal orrery of stars seemed to be siphoning his strength. However, it too didn't dare to touch the contamination of the Mother Tree, so it directly separated and dealt with the elements, separating the sun's part and the Mother Tree, using his own strength to fight against himself. As the orrery turned, with nearly every passing second, the light shining from the stars into the outer world was dimming. What kind of trick is this? Do you think you can restrain me with this? With a cold expression, Helios jolted the sun. The light that he released instantly transformed, turning from ethereal radiance into tangible malevolent beings, which then charged towards the gradually rotating barrier. A mere few gods of stars, perhaps these malevolent creatures are not your match, but the cosmos is so vast, you will certainly not be able to kill them all. As long as they can breach the barrier, the outcome won't be any different. So, in that moment, because the sun's glow was lost, the heavens dimmed. On the contrary, the zodiacal star domain that had just absorbed a portion of the sunlight seemed to glimmer resplendently. The mortal realm, Northern Sea. Standing on the isle like a colossal gravestone, Zeus was preparing to inscribe the text upon it, to seal the remnant power of Typhon. He hadn't yet decided how to do it. But as for dealing with subsequent matters, he had already been quietly scheming in his heart. This island couldn't be laid to waste. He would expand this place, moving more islands to join together above. In the future, he would guide humanity here. Then they would see inscribed upon it the stele describing how the divine king had vanquished the world-ending demon. It would be named Sicily by mortals, where they would build temples, extolling the unparalleled might of the divine king, and then despise the despicable sneak attack, but after all, which could not stand against the might of the divine king. They would recount this tale to the generations to come, and this would be the only tale of Typhon that remained in the mortal realm. At this moment, the divine king was mulling over his choice of words, as this concerned some of his own secrets. Hence, he did not intend for anyone else to write this official history for him. However, just when he was about to make his move, the sky suddenly darkened. The sun that previously radiated red light abruptly lost its brilliance, as if it disappeared into the sea of stars. Zeus suddenly looked up and quickly understood the underlying principle. A barrier. Athena still has such methods? No, those are the gods of stars from the spirit realm. During Typhon's catastrophe, not one of the primordial gods showed up, but in the end, it was still I who dealt with it. With a cold laugh, observing the changes in the starry sky, Zeus always felt a hint of familiarity, yet it wasn't quite the same. Nevertheless, it proved very effective. In truth, Zeus had only intended to have Athena delay the situation temporarily, never really expecting her to resolve the major changes affecting the sun. He thought he would have to deal with it himself. Sealing the sun, that was no simple task. But now it seemed she had done very well. This massive ritual apparatus appeared to employ the targeting power of a certain existence against the sun's energy, separating the celestial body's original power, then absorbing and transforming it with 12 star domains. Subsequently, the transformed power could, in turn, be used to suppress those parts belonging to the outer gods, effectively using the sun's own power to combat itself. Even throughout this process, the power dissipated in the struggle could expand and strengthen the area of the zodiacal star domain. A case of killing several birds with one stone. It's just that now she might have a bit of trouble. The one that specifically absorbs the sun's power must be the Sun Eater, which has appeared more than once in the Second Era. It can absorb the light of the sun but is unable to remotely separate the powers that have turned into evil beings. Zeus smiled at the irony, for a solution immediately came to mind. If possible, he quite hoped Athena could resolve this issue directly. After all, if this barrier worked, he could spare the power he'd otherwise have to use to suppress the sun. Therefore, without hesitation, Zeus took out a sphere of light from within himself. A dazzling hall, from which seemed to echo the sounds of battle cries and clashing arms, known as the Hall of Valor, also called Valhalla. It was originally a place where Odin, the divine king of the 9 realms, trained warriors, with female warriors called Valkyries sent to the mortal realm to select brave warriors who died in battle, bringing their souls back to serve. Prepared by Odin for the twilight of the gods, this special palace also had a certain symbolism of war. Zeus learned some things from it, but he couldn't grasp the further content no matter what. He didn't lack guards with some battle power, but not overwhelmingly strong. The divine king had originally planned to bestow the Hall of Valor as a reward to Ares and Aphrodite, to extend the god of war's divine authority, and to have the Valkyries train their serve as guards for the goddess of beauty, creating an intersection of beauty and war. There weren't enough deities to combat the evil entities formed from temporary flashes of light. With the help of the Hall of Valor, this significant trouble could potentially be stopped right in the starry sky. As for Ares, humph. With a snort, Zeus, just like in the original myths, didn't really like Ares, neither did Hera. The latter had no choice. This was her only offspring with Zeus, who had a strong divine office. But for the divine king himself, there were other options. So, where did Apollo go? If his previous absence was attributed to cowardice, although incongruent with Apollo's usual behavior, Zeus could understand. But the calamity of Typhon has ended, so where was he now? Besides, there was another problem to solve. If the sun were gone, or at least if its light was blocked out, how would the people on Earth obtain light in the future? Chapter 561. The Source of the Fallen Heavens. Zeus, of course, had no idea what light was, but someone had already figured it out for him. At this moment, Apollo, whom the divine king had been obsessively thinking about, was not in any other place but on Mount Olympus, in front of what had once been the grand entrance to the temple of the sun god. The silver doors had long since collapsed, and, beneath the broken remnants of the ruined temple, a will shimmering with a golden aura revealed a corner edge. The divine artifact lay overturned here, buried under rubble, and despite looking somewhat pale, a flicker of joy mixed with confusion passed through Apollo's eyes as he gazed at the scene before him. The divine artifact that appeared here was undoubtedly the chariot of the sun. This tool, originally used by Helios to control the great day, had also been briefly utilized by Apollo, but as the god of sun advanced into a realm of more powerful divine power, this artifact was, in fact, shelved. The reason was simple: for the god of sun, the artifact was actually a symbol of disgrace. At least that's what Helios had always believed. The existence of the sun chariot verified the days he was imprisoned by his father. It was that period that left him with insufficient divine power, so much so that he, a sun god, actually needed the help of an artifact to exercise authority. And afterwards, it became a product of threats from Cronus, witnessing the dark past of Helios. Therefore, when he could easily wield the sun on his own, the sun chariot was naturally abandoned by him, left inside the temple of the sun god on Mount Olympus. And since the king of all monsters who attacked the Mount of the Gods had no interest in such things, it ultimately remained within these ruins. Until today, when light was obscured and the land fell into darkness. Recovering from the excruciating pain of the damaged origin, Apollo seemed to sense a mysterious guidance, which led him here, back to Mount Olympus. What puzzled him, though, was that while he had found the source of the attraction, what did it have to do with him? Who's there? Lost in thought, as if sensing something, Apollo's gaze hardened, and he suddenly turned around. The silver bow was drawn into a full moon, and resplendent light converged at the tip of the arrow. In the direction he aimed, an old woman of a wretched and ugly countenance had appeared, as if out of nowhere. "Do not rush, cough cough, son of Zeus, excellent archer Apollo, I am not your enemy. As you can see, I am Atropus, a craftsman who snips the threads of fate. That we meet here is guided by destiny." A trembling hand holding a staff, Atropus offered a smile, but to others, this smile seemed more of a threat. "You are naturally sensitive to the fluctuations of fate, and that is why you have come here. The sun has met with disaster, but the mortal realm cannot be without light. You, son of Zeus, are the deity who brings light to the mortal realm. You better be speaking the truth, self-proclaimed deity of destiny." After a moment of silence, although Apollo did not trust the other's goodwill, he still lowered his bow and arrow, for his senses told him the divine power of the other was not formidable. And indeed, as the other had said, Apollo was indeed more sensitive to fate than others. It had always been so in the original myths. Just like Themis, Phoebe, Gaia, and the others, Apollo had once held the Oracle Stone Tablet, earning the revered title god of prophecy. Even though the he of today would never have the chance to touch this divine artifact again, this innate gift had not disappeared as a result. "Not hold destiny, Apollo. I'm but a craftsman who snips it, simply following the pattern. That's my work. Fate always has its own course. If I act recklessly, the sharp blade of the scissors will only wound myself." Atropus subtly shook her head, correcting Apollo's mistake. "Perhaps, but whatever it is, why have you come?" Speaking indifferently, Apollo was neither here nor there about it. "Of course, I've come to help you," offered Atropus with a chuckle, undisturbed by Apollo's coldness. "And incidentally, to prevent destiny from straying any further. The world cannot be without the sun, just as the earth cannot be without life. That is why I have found you, Apollo. Apart from Helios, who has betrayed the world, you are the one most suited to drive the sun chariot. But I have driven it before, and the results were not very good. Besides, haven't you forgotten something?" The tall and handsome deity reached out, and the divine artifact buried under the disarray flew out into the open. Like an endless light source, the body of the chariot, the yoke, the axle, the wheel shone like gold, and the spokes of the wheel gleamed with silver. The bridle intended for the beasts was inlaid with pristine gemstones. The artifact had not been damaged in the previous catastrophe. But pointing at the chariot of the sun, Apollo bluntly retorted, "That is a chariot frame, and a chariot frame itself has no power. It is a means to harness the sun, not a source that brings light and heat to the mortal realm. That is the role of the sun itself, so even if I can use it, where is the other sun? That is precisely why I am here, Apollo, to guide you swiftly out of this solar disaster. The sun you seek, your sun, it lies right here on this mountain, in your father's treasury. Typhon had no interest in these articles. Only you are their destined master." Chapter 562. The Source of the Fallen Heavens _2. The sharp laughter rang out as Atropus gestured for Apollo to come over. Predetermined fate's master is naturally fake, and that son of Apollo is merely talk. In truth, in Atropus's eyes, if Apollo were to take this step, it could very well entangle him with some old relics from bygone days. But that was of no concern to her. What would become of Apollo was a matter far into the unknown future. But without the sun for even a single day in the mortal realm, countless lives would perish as a result. Having just been born to a fate riddled with holes, Atropos could only borrow against the future to patch up the present problems. As for future matters, they would be dealt with in the future. At least for now, let her catch a breath and put an end to this worldwide disaster. In the absolute void, a speck of bright light bobbed up and down. Azure light coiled around it, gently undulating, bringing with it a slight tide. In the cold void of darkness, a shadow hastened toward the direction of the world, and the closer it got, the greater the power that surrounded her became. Whoosh! Extreme movement turned into extreme stillness. Nyx's figure suddenly came to a halt. Although her power far exceeded that of the gods compared to the pull of the world's force, it was Nyx who ended up coming later despite acting earlier. However, it wasn't such matters that halted her, but the darkness sprawling before her. Is there an issue? Her voice was mild. Nyx looked at her old neighbor. She knew why he had come, for unlike the spirit realm, which was self-contained with the outer world's connections not deep, the land of eternal night without its mistress was inevitably a bit different from usual. If she only moved within the reach of the power of chaos, this difference wouldn't show. If it were average deities, likewise, they wouldn't notice the difference. If it had been another time, this subtle change wouldn't be noticeable, but this time was different. Erebus, who had been her neighbor for millions of years, had always deeply perceived the changes in the land of eternal night, and the birth of the Fates had inevitably brought changes to Nyx's triphased incarnation. Indeed, Nyx, after all, as a primordial deity of chaos, your sudden retreat roused a bit of my curiosity. Erebus's gaze moved past Nyx, looking behind her, but to no avail. The void was cold and silent, the sense of existence growing fainter the further outward one went. However, for Erebus, this scene wasn't unfamiliar. Once, he had also followed some kind of connection all the way outward, eventually discovering the remnants of the 9 realms, which were also the origin of this disaster. Thinking of this, Erebus couldn't help but remind, I don't know what you've found, but Nyx, look at the world now. That outer god, he's far more terrifying than any other being we've encountered before. He's the first, but no one knows if he will be the last. Heh, you care about that? With a cold laugh under the ever-changing veil, Nyx's eyes carried a hint of mockery. At least on this matter, the Divine King has a greater sense of responsibility than you. He's becoming more and more bound to the present world, while you, I'm afraid, are just the opposite. Without any further thoughts to express, Nyx's figure moved again. She directly breached the darkness before her and then headed towards the world. Just as Erebus could perceive the changes in the land of eternal night, Nyx had been paying some attention to what he had done. The underground world adjacent to the underworld, the newly born race of wisdom, the powerful individuals with an aura similar to that of an outer god, and the realm of lightless with its occasional special turmoil. Did he care about the world? He only cared about his own unspeakable plans. An anomaly such as the Fleshmother tree that was out of the ordinary was already enough to make him wary, and naturally Erebus did not wish for another to come, unless it was after his plans were successful. But clearly, although Nyx did not know what he was scheming, she had no intention of cooperating. Whatever you do is your business, but what I do is none of your concern. A shadow swept through the void and drifted down into the night beneath the world, leaving only Erebus standing alone in space. It seems there are no problems, Nyx, you're still so gullible. Shaking his head with a smile, Erebus turned to look in the direction of the world, not knowing what outcome he had obtained. He indeed did not wish for more variables, but that was not something he or Nyx could influence. If there really was another thing there similar to the remnants of the 9 realms, no matter the outcome, it would be a struggle between worlds. The only one who can probably intervene at this point is the outsider. Staring in the direction of the chaos world, a dark red hue had already stained a substantial area in Erebus's view. With Niflheim at its core and the small worlds around it as protective wings, numerous red dots were scattered across the entire world. And until not long ago, they had all been gathered in that sealed-off world, with no hint to be seen. And the source of all this, the wooden twig that had once caught him off guard and pierced his palm. Does your strength never exhaust? Or is it that at your stage, as long as you can infect and assimilate enough beings, your power will actually grow? Taking a deep breath, Erebus could only hope that the present world would at least be more effective this time, and not allow the other to take even greater actions in the Third Era. Gazing in silence, the Lord of Darkness felt some regret. He should have paid more attention to it. Otherwise, today's outcomes wouldn't have arisen. However, amidst his contemplation, he did not notice another stream of light wrapped in space-time gliding by his side, other than Nyx's. Of course, even if he had noticed this one, he probably couldn't have detected it. As if replaying a moment from billions of years before, the stream of light crashed directly into the Chaos world, and an utterly ordinary body seemed to be about to take form. Some force had severed his connection with all external things, whether it be fates or anything else. Perhaps for the Chaos world itself this severance was not useful, but indeed he could fool everything else. Perhaps by coincidence or perhaps due to some attraction, this stream of light wrapped in the force of spacetime was influenced by the residual unrest of spacetime in the final process of entry. The warping of time was also reflected upon him. His time was slowed down. It might be a few hundred years or even 1,000, but when he truly arrived in this world, it probably would not be tomorrow. Chapter 563, History from the Winner's Perspective. Is this what you called the sun? At the top of Olympus, behind the palace of the Divine King, amidst the ruins, Apollo gazed at the treasures that hovered in midair. Without a doubt, any treasure that could survive even a casual attack from Typhon was no ordinary object. Yet, while the three orbs of light before him indeed exuded the aura of the sun, Apollo hesitated to approach. Are you sure they can be used? To me, they seem just as uncontrollable as the power of Typhon. Apollo had encountered similar powers before but did not equate these with the divine fragments scattered across the land. He had not yet been born when the ancient god of sun was dismembered. Apollo had considered those divine fragments akin to divine blood. However, the entities before him undoubtedly radiated an aura belonging to a true god. It was some kind of qualitative change, yet upon them Apollo also sensed vibrations similar to a curse. Nothing is unusable, Apollo. Even Typhon's power can be controlled, let alone that I do not intend for you to contain it, Atropos said with a smile, prodding the ground with her wooden staff. Strictly speaking, the shattered scepters before them were also a source of disturbance in fate, and using them could undoubtedly mitigate this chaos. 1/3 of the day, they each symbolized the morning sun, the noonday sun, and the evening sun. I do not know how they came to be, but they undoubtedly originated from a Titan deity older than Helios, and they are closer to the essence of that supreme celestial body, Atropos explained. If you drive them with the chariot of the sun, using this divine artifact as a medium to wield them, you can become the new sun god, at least, the one that mortals believe in. Faith! Looking at the three golden orbs before him, flickering and flowing like fire, Apollo hesitated. Until today, Apollo hadn't cared much about faith, but as his own origin had been inexplicably wounded, this external force he once disregarded suddenly became important. Even with a divine artifact to navigate, it won't be easy, he mused. After a moment of contemplation, Apollo finally made his decision. But he still wanted to hear what the craftsman who claimed to tailor fate had to say. Then you'll have to figure out a way on your own, or rather, the Divine King should find a way for you. Atropos' expression remained unchanged as she saw Apollo's indecision, and she simply smiled in response. Guided by fate, Atropos knew that if these three scepter fragments from the ancient sun god were to form a true sun, the person using them could potentially become entangled with the Titan deity's destiny. And with the passage of time and the propulsion of faith, there might even occur some changes that Atropos herself could not foresee. Yet, the fates did not warn Apollo because the mortal realm indeed needed the sun, and they had no better option. Fortunate that all this is a matter for a distant future, Atropos sighed inwardly, aware that her action could indeed compensate for the distortion in fate, but was nothing more than a short-term solution. But that was all she could do. After all, there are generally 3 ways to resolve debts. Continually pay off old debts with new ones. As long as one can still borrow, there will be no problem. or let someone else pay the debt for her, which is also a way. And the last method, naturally, is to solve not the debt but the individual to whom the debt is owed. For Atropos, the last option was clearly impossible, so her choices were limited to the first two. Swoosh! As a point of light rose from Mount Olympus, the land that had darkened due to the absence of sunlight finally welcomed the light once again. The rising sun slowly ascended from the pillar in the east, as if dispelling the calamity brought by Typhon's disaster. The light climbed higher and finally halted near the original place of the zodiacal star domain. It dared not ascend any further and chose instead to traverse sideways. Just as it did with every sunrise and sunset before, the sun once again rotated across the mortal realm. From daytime to nighttime, from nighttime to daytime. When one cycle completed, the laws appeared to acknowledge the existence of this new sun. After all, in essence, it was indeed one and the same with the one before. Returning to Mount Olympus, Zeus felt as if he was in a different era. In other corners of the Mount of the Gods, the deities who had previously departed were also returning one after another. Zephyrus, how goes the tally? Zeus asked lightly as he stood before the collapsed great hall. Not great, my lord. Aside from a few who were sealed, suppressed, or captured, most either fled or are still rampaging across the land. Those with reason are manageable, but the rest seem to have abilities that are almost undying. Zephyrus, the god of west wind, reported respectfully, standing a step behind. With the sun's ascendancy lasting a week, the disorder in laws brought about by Typhon's descent and the collision between fate and order finally drew to an end. The power that had once limited the deities rose again from the land, divine powers unavailable for use, and this time it seemed to be even stronger. Perhaps after several disasters, the laws of the mortal realm had triggered a more stringent self-defense mechanism. At this moment, every sentient divine force was suppressed by laws that were several magnitudes stronger than before. Chapter 564. History from the winner's perspective _2. In this situation, the weaknesses of the Olympian gods were undoubtedly exposed. Facing those rampant beasts on earth, without the aid of authority and divine power, the gods were almost unable to withstand a single blow, with only a few deities able to engage with them. This led to the gods, tasked with suppressing those monsters, having to return to the Mount of the Gods and seek help from His Majesty, the Divine King. But what they did not realize was that Zeus actually had no solution to this either. For, compared to constraining the gods, the law held even greater disdain for the unrestrained actions of those with great divine power. And so, as the anointed divine king of the present age, for the first time in history, Zeus sensed the inclination of the will of the law. It mandated that the divine king prevent any primordial deity and outer god from rampaging on earth, but at the same time, the divine king himself had to abide by this rule. As the king of all gods, Zeus was naturally the upholder and exemplar of the present order. Therefore, regarding the gods' pleas for help, the divine king gave no indication of assistance. Atop Mount Olympus, within the temporarily constructed palace. At the moment, the nymphs who had fled for refuge returned to the mountain. They cleaned up the corpses of their kin and the shattered debris, then danced in the great hall to accompany the graces. The disaster had ended, or at least it had ended for the gods, who were eager to celebrate. Everything was so wonderful. The deities were magnificent, victory was inevitable. The divine king was invincible, and no being could overturn the rule of Olympus. However, before they could fully commence the celebration, they needed to summarize the disaster that had affected the world. Every event required a conclusion. For instance, how the invincible divine king came to be thrashed by Typhon and how he turned the tables. Even if the divine king's deeds would be lauded in the mortal realm in the future, there ought to be an explanation. In any case, the affairs of the mortal world should be left for them to resolve themselves, and the evil creatures stripped of power comparable to that of the deities may not be unbeatable after all. With Typhon gone, they are nothing to be feared. Glancing at the gods, Zeus casually dismissed their cries for aid. He shifted the topic, talking about the beginning and end of the disaster of Typhon. Zeus was once defeated by Typhon, an undeniable fact. Countless lives had witnessed this scene, let alone the gods. Even the nymphs and elves born among the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas had many who had seen it. But he would not admit he was defeated head-on, even though in reality, the king of all monsters had indeed brought him down in the dust in a fair and square one-on-one battle with legitimate strength. Therefore, as I've said before, all of this originated from the conspiracy of the outer gods and Mother Earth. The outer god endowed Typhon with a special power, the one you have witnessed, that which corrodes all things and assimilates living beings. No one understands it, no one could have been prepared for it beforehand. It is a phenomenon unseen by the gods. Yet, inversely, Gaia betrayed every secret of the gods to this world-destroying monster, and her treachery went far beyond that. She calculated the time I would leave the Mount of the Gods and made arrangements in advance. She knew I had no suitable weapon in hand, greatly weakening my strength. Finally, she used her authority as Mother Earth to conceal Typhon's presence, coordinating a surprise attack against me. Faced with disparity in information and numbers, the unsuspecting fell victim to the calculating. That despicable monster succeeded, earning a victory without a shred of honor. The voice was flat, but seemed to hold a tinge of helplessness and incomprehension. The divine king appeared to not understand why Gaia, one of the primordial deities, would conspire with an outer god. Was it because she coveted their power, or perhaps sought revenge? But Gaia is a deity of the present world. Even if stripped of her laws, she should bear no resentment towards the current world. Despite her grievances with the divine king, and despite being suppressed by Zeus in front of all the gods, these were not reasons for her to betray the current world, to stab the divine court in the back. If you think the world has wronged you, if you believe the judgment of the divine king is in error, then you should come to the divine court and communicate with the gods. You should try to change it, handle it in a better way, not connive with outsiders to destroy it. Of course, failure is only temporary. Later, my loyal subject, Zephyrus, the god of west wind, found me. Not that you were disloyal, but he just happened to be the closest and fastest. And the world still favored me. Typhon thought it was punishing me by draining my blood, but in reality, this act gave birth to fate. Under my command, fate's agent devised the toxic divine fruit, easily fooling that foolish monster into consuming it. Zephyrus reclaimed for me the divine artifact thunder, an unstoppable blade, ensuring I wasn't left weaponless in the face of the enemy. Stripped of preparation, bereft of cowardly ambushes, when we stood on an equal footing, that ludicrous monster naturally couldn't be my match. No matter how fiercely it struggled, it couldn't escape death in the end. This is the conclusion of the entire incident. The measured voice echoed in the great hall, the divine king with a stern face. There were gods in the middle who had posed questions, and the divine king had gently answered each one. In response to Zeus's narration, although the gods didn't entirely believe it, most did not intend to question it. For the divine king's power in overcoming Typhon was witnessed by all. As for the previous defeat, that was naturally entirely Gaia's fault. Gaia challenged the divine court, slandered the divine king, and pinned the deeds of another primordial god on Zeus. But the great divine king didn't hold a grudge, feeling sympathy for the tormented Mother Earth. He hoped she would come forth and resolve the conflict between them through communication. However, Gaia ultimately betrayed the trust of the divine king, conspiring with outer gods and causing chaos in the world. She even arranged conspiracies and ambushed the divine king. She briefly succeeded not because she was so powerful, but because of the kindness and mercy of the divine king. And her eventual failure was not surprising, for the king of all gods had once defeated her before, and there was no question of this fact. So whispers of discourse arose among the gods. Among those present, only Zephyrus knew some truth of the matter, but he was clearly not going to speak out. Among the deities not present, perhaps a handful of reclusive titans had grasped some of the causes and effects, but they had long ceased to participate in the struggles of the world. Gaia herself was certainly aware, but no one would believe the word of a loser, especially one who had already committed various follies as Mother Earth, not to mention the gods, who were scared by Typhon like lost dogs, wouldn't have a good impression of her. Even the ones who had originally sympathized with her had long since changed their minds. In any case, you've disrupted the peace shared by all gods, and that is an indelible sin. Thus, all truth fell under the veil in the divine king's account, and history from then on had its conclusion sealed. The conniving, despicable Typhon, the ungrateful, clueless Gaia, the inscrutable outer gods lurking in the shadows, as well as the king of all gods who had foreseen the outsider, but was too kind and merciful to respond appropriately, and of course the loyal subordinates of the divine king, and the gods who, temporarily retreated, plotting rebellion. Everything was laid out clearly. This was the true essence of events. No objections were raised, for after all, everyone was part of the divine court. And history is always written by the victors. Chapter 565, Rewards and the Focal Point of Human Nature. The characterization of the past had thus drawn to a close, and no one would be held accountable for their errors. Just as Zeus had never failed, the gods had never fled. They had merely avoided the sharp edge and cooperated with the divine king's plan. This information would be incorporated into the mortal teachings as an explanation for this disaster, and after 1,000 years it naturally became the truth. Of course, no matter how much the gods might embellish, only one point remained unchanged. That was about the true origin of this disaster, the presence of the outer god, Blood Mother Tree. Its name was not directly mentioned, and any content that could point to it was not laid down in text. Yet no god attempted to deny the existence of such a creature, and all lateral descriptions of it inevitably revolved around the concepts of terror and might. The latter, of course, was to prove that the gods were not powerless. After all, no matter the reason, countless lives were lost in this disaster. To belittle the enemy was to belittle oneself. As for the former, it was naturally because the gods themselves were in fear, not because of Typhon but because of the sun. Unnoticed by anyone, Helios, who had previously laughed and talked with them, had transformed into an evil god corrupted by the outer god, which had brought the gods a tremendous shock. No one knew how it had achieved this, regardless of whether Helios did so willingly or was compelled. They all wished to prevent such an incident from happening again. And to stop a behavior, fear was far more effective than any prohibition. The fall of the sun took all of us by surprise. It was a disaster, and my daughter Athena is still dealing with this matter, and has not yet returned. But whether she is here or not, the merits she has established are undeniable. The mortal realm should spread her name, just as her forebears did. The disaster had ended, and naturally it was time for rewards. But just as Zeus said, Athena was still in the starry sky and had not returned. Sealing the sun was no easy task. It was a rather difficult and complex process. The ritual track laid out in the zodiacal star domain was just the beginning, and there was still much left for her to do. Apollo, another deity who was not present. Upon uttering his son's name, Zeus felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was somewhat pleased that Apollo had resolved a problem for him. On the other, he was somewhat discontent with Apollo and Atropos for taking matters into their own hands. However, the three fates were not his subordinates, and the relationship between Zeus and Atropos was not even as close as that between the Heavenly Father and Mother Earth. As for Apollo, Zeus was not yet upset enough over this matter to create a rift with a progeny who posed no threat to him. Like Athena, as a principal god of Olympus, a presence that arises anew for the mortal realm, Apollo rightfully deserves worship in the city-states that believe in him. At the same time, those who were followers of Helios must now turn to the new sun god or submit to the sun goddess, and those temples belonging to him should be dismantled and rebuilt. Any life that dares to worship Helios is an enemy of Olympus. No one objected. For this corrupted god of sun, nobody spoke on his behalf. After all, as Helios himself had once realized, he was an outsider to the Olympian pantheon. And third is my most loyal arm. With a smile, the divine king looked at his most faithful servant, the god of west wind. Zephyrus, my friend, please forgive me for mentioning you third, but I must maintain the dignity of the principal god's position. After all, it is a right I personally bestowed upon them, a proof of their superiority over all gods. It is only right, your majesty. Bowing slightly, Zephyrus was as docile as ever. Thank you for your understanding, haha. But soon this issue will no longer exist. Zephyrus, in the name of the divine king, you will become another principal god of Olympus, and following this, I will also grant you the authority over meteorology, a reward you rightly deserve. Since Crius was confined in the abyss, to prevent any insurrection of the laws relating to the present age, Zeus, Poseidon, and other godly authorities with similar powers had been exercising the divine powers over meteorology. And now, Zeus had formally handed this duty over to Zephyrus in the name of the divine king. This was not an innate godhood and thus would not increase the amount of divine power Zephyrus received. It was more akin to his position as leader of wind gods, just something established under the divine authority. Yet even so, the god of west wind was greatly pleased. You always make distinctions clear in rewards and punishments, your majesty. With a wave of his hand, another principal god was in place. Although he was not yet a powerhouse, it was only a matter of time. The three deities who had truly established merits during this disaster had received their rewards. Zeus looked around. The rest were minor, consolatory rewards. The gods needed something presentable to prove their efforts. Thus, he granted Ares a battle helmet to commend him for being the first to intervene in the fight between him and Typhon. Although the outcome was not splendid, it was nonetheless a symbol of courage. He also gave his sister Demeter a garland of flowers. Chapter 566 Rewards and the Fall of Human Nature _2. In Demeter's eyes, Zeus saw the same resentment as always, but he still smiled as he adorned her with the beautiful ornament. The divine king never minded being generous in such minor matters. After all, he was well aware of what Demeter was capable of. Afterwards, the divine king consecutively bestowed different rewards upon the gods, some honors greater than the actual gifts. It was not until he had gone full circle that he seemed to finally remember something and turned his attention to Aphrodite. During the catastrophe of Typhon, the goddess of beauty had fled as well, which wasn't a problem, but Zeus was concerned that she had only taken her daughter Harmonia with her. In this disaster, the contributions of mortals are as indispensable as those of the gods. The prince of Phoenicia, Cadmos, proved to me the courage of mortals with his actions. He too shall receive the corresponding reward. Aphrodite, the gift I am giving you and your daughter is such a fine marriage. With a smile on his face, but no hint of negotiation, Zeus announced loudly from the center of the hall. Cadmos will establish a city-state under the guidance of the deities, and Harmonia will become his wife. The bravest among humans, he has brought peace to the world with his efforts. His marriage to Harmonia will be the perfect end to this disaster. Following the distribution of rewards, a long-lasting feast began on Mount Olympus. Perhaps to vent their fear of Typhon, or for some other reason, many demigods whose origins were not recorded in later generations were born during this feast. Like Helios and the scalding water goddess's illegitimate child Phaeton, if he had not arrogantly driven the sun chariot, bringing disaster everywhere, his name would not have had the right to appear in myths. And there were many demigods like him. Of course, demigods is a broad concept. It can refer to a race as well as to a level of strength. These so-called demigods born of the gods' revelry typically refer only to the former, as their powers are not very strong. Although as the first-generation demigods, they are all inevitably capable of entering transcendental domains, but that's about it. Most of them don't even possess divinity sufficient to sustain eternal life, succumbing to age and finally turning to dust. Zephyrus, do you have something to say to me? Strolling along the newly restored mountain path, Zeus looked down at Olympus. The feast had just begun, but the indulgence of the deities often didn't mean the attendants shared the same pleasures. The servants who had escaped the disaster were laboring between the mountains, clearing the shattered rubble, and building new temples. Watching this scene, the divine king was reminded of a deity he had encountered earlier. It was someone he saw fleeing in a panic on the sea while he was confronting Typhon, a small and ugly fellow. To Zeus's surprise, he sensed a bloodline aura similar to Hera's on the individual. At first he was furious, and if he hadn't been fighting Typhon, he would have almost captured the fellow for questioning. But then he realized something. It seemed like the person only bore Hera's bloodline. Considering this, perhaps he could find a way to make him useful. Your Majesty, it's like this. Not knowing what Zeus was thinking about, the god of West Wind simply stood by, hands at his side, showing no difference despite his ascension to principal god. Previously, while I was following your Majesty's order to cleanse the eastern lands of demons, I was tracking Typhon's offspring, the three-headed hellhound Cerberus, eastwards when I unexpectedly encountered the goddess of the magic net. Did you suffer at her hands? Shaking his head with a smile, Zeus said somewhat helplessly. Well, I can't help you there, but it's probably just a prank. Actually, as long as she doesn't bother me, let her do her own thing. That's not it. Princess Hecate didn't take any notice of me, perhaps all thanks to your Majesty's authority. With an impassive compliment, Zephyrus continued, in the face of the oncoming three-headed dog, the goddess easily subdued the demon. It seems she intended to turn it into a guardian for her home, but that's none of my concern. I had planned to take my leave, but the omnipresent wind in that area told me that another human kingdom exists there. They are not of the fourth generation of humans. They defy your will, still praising Prometheus as a sage, and most importantly, their faith. They claim the Olympian gods, including you and me, to be false gods, right? Zeus interrupted Zephyrus's narration with a calm demeanor, unsurprised by this. It seems I was being meddlesome, your Majesty. He responded respectfully, but at this moment, the god of the west wind began to regret his words. He had thought it was a place unnoticed by the divine king. After all, it was on the southeastern coast of the land, but now it seems that Zeus had been aware of their existence all along. Zephyrus did not want to know why the divine king had not eradicated them, but he was certain there were things he did not need to know. Ah, my friend, you needn't overthink it. That human kingdom is indeed a bit troublesome, but it's probably not as terrible as you think. It will exist, Zephyrus, but it will exist only there. Ever since the incident with Leto, Zeus had been aware of the existence of Silver Moon City. Those blasphemous speeches, doctrines of disdain for all gods. At first, Zeus was actually a bit panicked, since at that time he hadn't yet established the sovereign ritual, nor had he experienced the war to suppress Gaia. He once thought Silver Moon City's existence was the primordial god's tentacle intending to subvert Olympus. However, later on, as his own strength increased, and with his covert and overt attention to Silver Moon City, Zeus dismissed that idea. He found that those disdainful sayings about the gods seemed not to come from the primordial gods themselves, but from his servants and followers. Human affairs should be left to humans to resolve, especially since the mortal realm is becoming increasingly unfriendly to gods. With a sigh, Zeus was increasingly glad for the existence of the invented divine arts. As the god-king chosen by the current will, I will not, nor can I reveal the power of the gods first in the mortal realm. But if you make a move first, he might not be able to beat them himself, but wasn't the world biased in his favor? Zeus was already quite adept at this approach. As for how he would ensure that the aggressor would always be someone else, the followers of the Olympian pantheon far outnumbered the others by more than tens of times. With time, this demographic advantage would only grow. So no matter how you look at it, if the primordial gods do not intervene, the others can hardly be a match. No rush. Musing silently, even though he felt he had the upper hand, Zeus felt he still couldn't be completely ruthless. Well, let the followers in the mortal realm block the others inside that small city. As a god, it's wise to leave some room for maneuver, so that one may greet each other amicably afterward. Spring passed and autumn arrived. Time flowed on. The disaster of Typhon had thus ended, but its impact did not stop there. Whether it was the time anomalies, the further strictness in the laws, or the offspring that were born only after its death, all these changes had permanently remained in the chaos world. But those are stories for another time. At this moment, the stream of light wrapped in the force of spacetime was still laboriously traveling through the bubble of spacetime. From its trajectory, its landing point seemed a bit to the north. That should be somewhere in the northeast of the continent, close to the coastline. At this moment, the place was still uninhabited, but it was unknown what would happen by the time it truly fell there. Chapter 567. Welcome to the New Era and Alchemy Association? From the sky above, the mortal realm appears as nothing more than a silent film. Life and death, savagery and civilization. Beasts small as ants scurry across the land. Occasionally birds streak across the sky, wings beating powerfully in flight. Among them, not lacking in grandeur, are mighty humans strong in spirit, erupting in great wars for various reasons on the ground. When centuries are condensed into a single day, the earth itself becomes the most marvelous silhouette. You can see the green fading away, replaced by layer upon layer of man-made hues, the web-like roads that seem sketched by the artist's brush, beginning with a few strokes at the corners, extending to the epicenter of this grand creation. The mortal realm is painted with all manner of extraordinary spectacles, countless love and hatred, the twilight of heroes, and beauties with graying hair, rise and fall of empires. And in this ephemeral scroll of intersecting lives, the closer to the center, the more marvelous and fantastical it naturally becomes. The closer to the periphery, the more ordinary and common it appears, clearly dwelling on the same world. Yet the two seem to exist in distinct epochs. But there are always exceptions. Like on this day, when a fiery meteor fell from the heavens, crashing into a suburb northeast of the continent. Perhaps because it was broad daylight, this meteor seemed so inconspicuous that only a few people noticed it even up until the moment it landed. When fire descends from the heavens, calamity is born. The year 852 of the New Chronicle, summer. On the outskirts of Thuringen, throughout the sparse woods, bestial roars can be heard intermittently, accompanied occasionally by the bothersome buzzing of summer insects. At the end of the dirt road near the woods, a flickering firelight shines in the darkness, illuminating the surrounding path. The one holding the torch is a robust, middle-aged male, wearing a patchwork coarse linen tunic, his hands calloused from obvious manual labor. The other man with him is not tall, but he also looks strong and capable. However, judging by his walking posture, his strength, like the former's, has been honed from labor. Nike, are you sure it's this place? We've been walking for half the night already. And you know I gave up the chance for tonight's guard selection. Stop talking nonsense, Sammer. Everyone knows that's not for people like us. Waving his hand to silence his companion's complaint, Nike raised the torch higher, hoping to see farther ahead. To pass that assessment, you either need a noble ancestor with a noble lineage, or you need to have undergone real training, which still requires a noble ancestor, and the demand for that is even greater. So instead of clinging to unrealistic hopes, why not gamble with me on our luck? A meteor. Do you have any idea how valuable this thing can be? Don't know, and I bet you don't either. Waving the pitchfork in his hand, Sammer shrugged. But Nike, legally speaking, everything here belongs to the city lord. So why did you come along instead of reporting me? With a mocking smile, illuminated by the firelight, Nike saw his old friend grit his teeth. You're right. I should have reported you. Damn it, let's take a gamble and see what we find. If there's nothing, I won't let you off the hook. In this era where the historical trajectory took a grand detour, classical republicanism coexisted with early feudalism, and even in some nations, slavery and collectivism were still maintained. In any case, at least in Thuringen, every bit of wealth on the land belonged to the landowner, and any act of taking without asking was a serious crime, punishable by death, and for such a regulation, even the Church of Justice and Law wouldn't raise an objection. But for two peasants who knew only of tilling the soil, this was almost their only chance in life. After all, although they were not slaves, they were far from citizens. Or, to put it in official terms, they should be called free people, which means semi-free laborers. And this was a link in the peasant discrimination chain, as the farmers around the city were considered formal citizens, but those who lived in nearby villages, only occasionally venturing into the city, were not. Therefore, they did not enjoy the rights of citizens under classical republicanism. If it had been a few years earlier, they might not have minded being excluded, as it was an era of noble by birth, and Sammer might not have chosen to take this gamble. But having witnessed the changes in the city in recent years, he had become increasingly intolerable of his own mediocrity. To put it poetically, I could endure darkness if I had never seen the light. Thuringen City changed year by year, but his rural village remained the same. Both seemed to be in two different worlds, intersecting yet isolated. Speaking of which, Nike, if we really strike it rich this time, how do you plan to spend it? In a world without light pollution, the night was much darker than the mortals of later generations could imagine. So dark that even with the aid of a torch, the two men felt as if they were walking on a road with no end. It was only because both of them were locals and very familiar with the nearby terrain that walking at night like this was possible. Otherwise, who knew if they were moving forward or backward? First, I'd enjoy it properly, but honestly, Sammer, I don't even know what that means to enjoy. It's not just about eating and drinking extravagantly. So what about you? Shrugging his shoulders and causing the torch to flicker, Nike stated plainly. Chapter 568. Welcome to the New Era and Alchemy Association. _2. I want to test whether I have the qualities to become a knight. I mean a more precise test. You know, that's my dream. Sammer's voice was low, as if he was thinking of something. After hearing his words, Nike fell silent as well. Dreams, everyone has them, but for the vast majority, that's all they ever are. Fanciful thoughts confined to sleep. Looks like we're almost there, just up ahead. Walking for an indeterminate amount of time, Nike, who carried the torch, suddenly stopped. In the flickering light of the fire, they both could vaguely see the deep, bottomless crater ahead. The light from the torch wasn't much help, making it impossible for them to discern the depth or the expanse of the hole. But if someone more knowledgeable were in their place, they would never dare to approach this pit. A meteor crater this close to Turingen City that had blasted such a large pit should have made a noise loud enough for the whole city to hear. But the reality was that, aside from Nike, who happened to see the fleeting streak of light, hardly anyone noticed the fallen fire meteor. Hiss, hey Nike, you might really have found something incredible. With a look of surprise, Sammer lowered his voice instinctively. There are actually fallen stars. I've heard that there could be something called a star core inside them. Even if there isn't one, the shell could sell for a lot of money. Stop gawking. Let's go down and take a look. Sticking their pitchfork into the ground, they began to carefully climb down the massive crater wall. The soil around them was somewhat loose, not at all like the compact ground one would expect from the impact of a meteorite, and on several occasions nearly made them tumble down. However, after several hours of effort, they luckily reached close to the bottom of the pit without incident. Be careful. Damn, the torch is dying out. Cursing as the light from the torch grew dimmer, Nike threw it aside and continued on. Fortunately, the weather was clear. By the moonlight, they could barely make out each other's whereabouts. Damn it, move! Ah! With a misstep, Sammer brought Nike down with him, and they both tumbled further downwards. Thud! Along with a muffled sound, the two of them collided at the bottom of the pit. Hiss! I told you to be careful. Of course I was careful. Do you think I wanted to fall down? If you'd brought an extra torch, this wouldn't have happened. With stubborn retort, Sammer struggled to stand. In the hazy moonlight, he began to survey their surroundings. It wasn't as he expected. There was no giant meteorite, nor any sense of heat. They were simply at the top of a purely earthy pit, as if it had been sliced down to form a conical hole. There was nothing around them, except a bit further away there was a faint reflection. A gemstone? Nike excitedly exclaimed. Is that a gemstone from a star? Fallen out? My God. So the stars really are made of gemstones. I thought that was just fanciful imagination from bedtime stories. Stop talking nonsense. Those aren't gemstones. Look carefully, they're transparent. Sammer walked closer. His vision was slightly better, so he could see a bit clearer. It wasn't some massive gemstone, but a thin layer of an oval crystalline substance. It appeared gemstone-like, but was actually slowly melting. Although he didn't know what it was, Sammer had an ominous premonition. A fire meteor fallen from the sky, an illogical crater, fantasy-like and magnificent crystal. None of it seemed normal. Moreover, according to some ancient legends from the north, a star's fall was no good omen. Wait, there's someone inside. Do you see that? Samer's face suddenly changed as he shouted. As they came closer, illuminated by moonlight, he could barely make out something beneath the crystalline layer, a humanoid figure. It appeared to be a young man, perhaps a teenager, definitely not very old. He was handsome, with skin unmarked by labor, draped in a silver-white robe. Gold patterns adorned the garment, resplendent with nobility and refinement. A living person, great goddess of wisdom, could what you saw not be a meteor but a gravely injured? Nike, what are you doing? Clank! The pitchfork struck the transparent crystal wall, and in the reflection of the moonlight, Nike's smile seemed somewhat ferocious. What else would I be doing? Of course I'm opening it up. I don't care who he is, but now he's my spoils of war. Do you see these clothes? I've never seen such exquisitely made garments. Just a sleeve of it could be worth 50 gold coins. Note 1. But, no buts. Don't you want to be a knight? If this really is a powerful being who's badly injured, your chance has come. Clank. Another hit, and the crystalline layer began to crack. Nike seemed encouraged, but Samer feared the crack wasn't entirely his doing. Regardless, they had come together, and if today's deed were to be discovered, neither could escape. Gritting his teeth, Samer joined in the pounding, just like before. What if? Clank, clank, clank. With each strike, time slowly passed. The sky began to brighten with twilight. The crystal shell grew thinner, and cracks multiplied. Chapter 569. Welcome to the New Era and Alchemy Association _3. Until one moment, with a sound that seemed to echo in the soul, it shattered in response, then dissipated in the air like vapor. Huh! Finally got it open. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Nike's spirits became increasingly agitated. He glanced at the unprotected young figure, a trace of frenzy flashing in his eyes. Wait! Hold on, don't rush. What are we waiting for? You're not thinking of backing out now, are you? Of course not. With a grave expression, Samer shook his head and then raised the pitchfork. No matter who he is, we've certainly offended him, so it doesn't matter whether he's dead or alive. Let's kill him first and then see what we can reap from his body. Without hesitation, under Nike's somewhat surprised but approving gaze, Samer thrust the pitchfork viciously towards the neck of the mysterious young man. It's said that as long as a spellcaster can still think, they can wield magic or sacred power, easily killing hundreds of mortals. Samer didn't know how that was done. The only spellcaster he had ever encountered being a low-ranking priest at the temple, who never displayed such formidable strength. But what if, who knows what kind of background this young man has? Better to kill him first. At least Samer was clear about one thing, that a dead person could definitely not summon anything. Like the deepest memory replaying, traversing faraway time and space amidst chaos and obscurity. Lane still didn't know how he had come to this world, his understanding of it only beginning after awaking from a long slumber. Now he was experiencing a similar scene, only this time, he had created the opportunity for himself. Swish! His thoughts not yet clear, but the sound of a sharp object cutting through the air instantly made Lane aware of his situation. Almost subconsciously, following the direction of the sound, he reached out to grab. The pitchfork, smeared with mud, wasn't sharp enough to pierce Lane's palm, but he still circumvented the tip, grasping the junction between the tine and the handle with precision. Then, in the eyes of the astonished attacker, he first pulled back with force, then pushed forward. Giggle! Samer, holding the pitchfork, was startled by the suddenly mobilizing Lane, but before he could react, an unexpected force sent him tumbling forward, and the pitchfork slipped from his grasp almost simultaneously. The next moment, he saw the long handle that slipped from his hands being turned into a weapon by another, striking back at him. However, having lost his balance, Samer couldn't respond in time and was hit directly in the throat. Accompanied by a teeth-gritting crash, his throat bone was shattered on the spot, and he fell to the ground, gasping, "Heh." Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and it wasn't until it was over that Nike just beginning to react. No, wait. This is just an accident. I mean, spare me, Shoo! Flipping the pitchfork in his hand, Lane precisely plunged it into the chest of the fleeing farmer, silencing his mumbled pleas. Narrowing his eyes, Lane slowly surveyed his surroundings, ascertaining his current situation. There was no sight of a familiar primordial god or any other deity upon opening his eyes, nor a large crowd of onlookers, such as the guards of a mortal nation. It seemed the outcome was satisfactory, at least there were no major deviations, otherwise he might have had to start over. In fact, the moment Lane sensed the force enveloping him crashing into a special temporal bubble, he had prepared for failure. But this was an attempt, and he had no determination to succeed or perish in the endeavor. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, saving him quite a lot of effort. Good. Step 1 of the plan, check. Standing up from the ground and stretching lazily, Lane felt his spirit become much livelier for a moment. As the sun fully rose from the horizon, the vast crater also became bright. Gazing at Samur, who was clutching his throat, convulsing subconsciously, blood continuously flowing from the corner of his mouth, Lane felt no sympathy. Whatever the reason, since they dared to strike at him, they should have been prepared to face death. To be human again, I need to address 3 questions first. Who am I, where am I, and what am I going to do? The first question was easy to solve. To put it in human terms, he needed to give himself a new name, as he couldn't possibly walk openly in the mortal realm using the name Lane. So, it was only natural for him to pick an appropriate pseudonym. Without much thought, Lane just changed the pronunciation slightly. From now on, he would be called Avon. As for his identity, that would just be someone from any kind of fallen family/school/organization, provided such things existed in this era. As for the second question, rubbing his forehead, Lane was a bit troubled, too, because he had the misfortune of encountering that spatial bubble. Both his arrival point and the time of his landing had changed dramatically. In his original plan, he intended to land near Silver Moon City and start his subsequent actions from there. But now, even without stars to navigate by day, he knew he was definitely not in the southern part of the continent, but in a somewhat northern direction. North of the main road, Lane couldn't say he had no memory at all, but also had no clear concept of this place. As before, it was a pristine continent, desolate and uninhabited. So, to solve this difficulty, he would have to sacrifice this troublesome fellow who had come looking for him. Chapter 570. Welcome to the New Era and Alchemy Association _4. Using the sharpened tip of a pitchfork as a pen, with the blood of the deceased for ink, Lane drew a terrifying array in the terrified and struggling gaze of Samur, much like a cultist would. Then, he smiled and approached, easily putting an end to Samur's futile struggles before tossing him into the center of the array. As the array lit up, in a special form, the energy from the dead man's flesh and blood was continuously transformed into controllable spiritual power. It was like a primitive holocaust, only there were no nature spirits to receive the sacrifice. This energy, mingled with the resentment of living beings, was merely used as a force to touch the omnipresent superficial magic net. With a flash of inspiration, the witchcraft advanced detection of thought was effortlessly cast, which was the sole value of Samur's extended life. Like a film reel, a massive amount of useful and useless information flashed before Lane's eyes. Although most of it was worthless, even the perceptions of a lowly peasant allowed Lane to understand this world that was both familiar and strange. Church, evil god, divine blood nobles, wizards. New Chronicle, the calendar established with the founding of Athens as a marker. The nation blessed by the gods, Olympia, the sanctuary of the heavenly Empress Argos. Blood sacrifice, natural disasters, northern barbarians worshipping the evil god, claiming that everything has a spirit and can become a god. And there's Thuringen City, the northernmost city-state within the Athenian sphere of influence. The city has seen major changes recently, because the king of Athens signed an agreement with the Emerald Ring Alchemy Society, leading to alchemical products gradually flowing out from the capital. What's this situation? Are the humans of the chaos world so fierce that they have researched alchemy to such a degree by themselves? One by one, Unexpected but welcome pieces of news flowed from the memory. In fact, Lane was a bit incredulous, not expecting a mere mortal he'd randomly selected to be so experienced. However, he had no time to focus on the individual's loves and hatreds, nor why he knew such irrelevant information. His attention was solely fixed on this Emerald Ring Alchemy Society. From nothing to inventing alchemy, if it were a god, it would be understandable, but how did humans achieve this? He was curious. As he pondered, Lane's attention was instantly captured by the content in the memory. It was precisely what he had wanted to know, the inventor of alchemy, and the president of the Emerald Ring Alchemy Society. He slowly typed out a question mark, and once again, Lane felt that this world was indeed very interesting. A child from a village outside the city of Eryxis who later went to study in the southeast of the continent. In Condonia City, he learned the secrets of witchcraft and, after becoming a grand sorceress, declined the White Tower's invitation, delving into the mysteries of witchcraft on his own. Eventually, after countless failures, he proposed the concept of equivalent exchange, believing that everything in the world could be transformed into another, and personally accomplished the feat of transmutation, thereby founding a new school of alchemy. His name thus spread among all countries. Heh! With a low chuckle, the memory before his eyes reached its conclusion, and Lane granted the unfortunate soul a swift end, then dusted off his clothes. Great alchemist Hermes, very good. This is an interesting development. Indeed, going offline appropriately does help the world progress. With a slight smile, Lane decided to first visit Turingen City, the nearest city. Memories, after all, are just memories. Advanced detection of thought is not soul insight or memory weave or any other advanced level witchcraft. Of course, maybe in the time he was offline, someone might have invented something even more impressive at the lower levels of witchcraft, who knows. In any case, browsing this version of memories was like reading a book, not only lacking illustrations, but the results were also indistinct in importance, with 99% redundancy. In the end, as the ancients, the later generations said it well, shallow learning from books is insufficient. One must experience things personally. Lane intended to use his own eyes to witness firsthand this mythic world that had veered who knows how far from the original history. Note 1. Regarding the names of the currencies in ancient Greece, different sources say different things. Here we use gold coin for stater, silver coin for drachma, also made of gold, but more silver coins were present, and this is still the name of the Greek currency. And copper coin for lepta, strictly speaking, it's a subsidiary currency, not a copper coin, but let's say it's a copper coin here. Likewise, modern Greece also uses this name. As for the conversion ratio, defer to this book.